I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon. This is episode number 151. Today in the show, we are joined by Randy Newberg, and we're discussing my very first black bear hunt, western whitetails, and the latest in conservation and public lands issues. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today on the show, I am joined by a very special guest, and that's someone we mentioned just a bit last week, Randy Newberg. And you know Randy as a previous guest on the podcast, I think in 2 different episodes, but Randy is also the host of the television show Fresh Tracks with Randy Newberg. He's the host of the Hunt Talk Radio podcast and one of the premier spokesmen and defenders of hunting, public lands, and conservation in North America. And I was recently lucky to be able to head out on a public land black bear hunt with Randy. So in today's episode, Randy joins me to discuss our little adventure, and he's going to share some spot and stock black bear 101 info as well, in case anyone else wants to try a hunt like this in the future. We also talk western whitetails, and then finally we wrap up the show by discussing the latest events related to the future of hunting and public lands conservation, and a few of our thoughts on these issues that are likely to impact all of our ability to hunt and fish and recreate in the outdoors in the future. So that is the game plan. And this one was a lot of fun to record. I hope you all enjoy just, half as much listening to this as we did actually sitting down and recording this with the mics. So with that, I do want to briefly pause to thank our partners at Sitka Gear for their support of this podcast. And, last week I mentioned that our Sitka story today would be related to that black bear hunt I was headed out on. And I mentioned that I might be able to share some audio from that hunt. Unfortunately, I do not have that. So this whole episode, though, really is a Sitka story, as both Randy and I depended on Sitka Gear for this hunt and the experiences that we're about to share with you. But I'll mention one technical gear thing that happened for me on this hunt, and it was on the second day, and it was down in the valley. It was probably high 60s, really sunny, really warm, and when I was loading up my pack, I had this kind of dilemma. I wasn't sure how many extra warm layers I wanted to put in my pack, because right now it was warm, it was hot, I didn't want to have a bunch of stuff in my pack. So I sat there and kind of debated this for a second, but when I looked at my insulating layers, I had a Kelvin light jacket. It's so small, so light, it packs up right into its pocket. I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm bringing that just in case. It's so small, so light, I don't think I'm really gonna, be inconvenienced by this. So I threw that in the pack just in case it cooled down, and lo and behold, it did. When I was high up on that mountain glassing for bears, the wind came up, the temperatures went down, and it got really cold. Luckily, I had that jacket. I pulled that out, pulled that over, and I can't tell you how happy I was to be able to glass and be just wrapped up in this blanket of warmth from that jacket. So it was a great reminder of how important layering is, and just knowing and having the right layers for the conditions you might face, and be able to change out that system as those conditions change. So with all that said, if you would like to learn more about Sitka's technical hunting apparel, you can visit sitkagear.com. And just FYI, their new 2017 products have just hit their website and are now available. So you can head over there ASAP to check those out if you're interested. And now, for the rest of my Sitka story, my very first spring spot and stalk black bear hunt, here's myself and Randy Newberg recording in Bozeman, Montana. And we are back now in studio, in person, with Randy Newberg. Thank you, Randy, for doing this.
Thanks for being here, Mark. I won't even charge you any rent for my studio here.
That's a good deal because this is nice. This is much nicer than my usual digs, and really a lot nicer than where I've been recording the last 2 weeks. Last week, I recorded in my truck, pulled off on the side of the road in Livingston. And I think 2 weeks before that, I was in a campground parking lot in the truck using the juice off of like the little cigarette adapter to keep the whole thing running. So this is a big upgrade.
Yeah, for those who don't know, we're sitting in my CPA office here in Bozeman, Montana right now, in the quiet room. This room right here, because this is where we hold client conferences, and it's obviously confidentiality is a big deal.
Yep.
That's why this room is soundproof, so it sounds like a studio.
It's very nice.
So
it's really good. So,
but there are no dead animals hanging on the wall here.
No, there's a couple nice pictures.
Yeah, but we need this room needs some dead animals.
Could you bring some Randy Newberg flavor to it?
I would like to, but since my name's not out on the front door anymore, since I sold my partnership interest, something tells me those might end up in the trash bin.
Well, it's I don't know, how do I say this? I'm very lucky, I think, to be here right now talking to you about this stuff because you have just been incredibly generous with your time this past week with me. And I just need to start by thanking you for that because this all started just because I was going to have coffee with you the other day. And we're just going to catch up a little bit and talk about some local knowledge I had that might be helpful to you and your son and just other things. And somehow that coffee led to multiple hunts and a podcast and me just taking all sorts of your time. So I don't think you knew what you're getting into when you agreed to get coffee. You might be regretting it now.
Actually, my wife said, "Don't you have something to do?" And I looked up and I saw that Mark Kenyon was in the neighborhood. I said, "Well, there's something to do. I'll take Mark on some hikes every evening and I'll take him to what I pretend are my favorite bear spots and we won't see a bear." I'm sorry, Mark. I don't know what I did wrong.
You don't need to apologize one bit because this was my very first bear hunt, and it was a really cool experience. So what I was hoping we could do here was talk about what we did, how we did it, how it went.
Yeah.
But then I also wanted to dive a little bit into the how-to part of it because I'd never gone bear hunting before this. And so before I knew I was going to go with you, I was planning on just going out there solo on my own. So I was reading every article I could find and watching YouTube videos and just trying to figure out how am I going to find some black bears on my own here in the spring.
Yeah.
Which was a little bit daunting. There's not as much information online about doing your own spring black bear hunt as I would have thought there'd be.
Right.
So for anyone listening, I'm hoping we can give some people kind of a 101 of, hey, if you want to go out here and try something like this, which I highly recommend now.
Yeah.
How can they do that? So I'm hoping we can get into that too. And then
just don't follow Randy Newberg around if you want to see black bears, right?
I learned that the hard way.
It's cool because you came to Montana, you bought your bear tag over the counter. Our season opens here statewide, April 15th. And actually I shouldn't say statewide. There's some places that have different opening dates and different closing dates, but the general rule is from April 15th to June 15th, spring bear season is open. And in Montana, you can't bait and you can't use hounds. Whereas if you go over to the border just west of here in Idaho, most of their units, not all, you can bait, and some of them you can use hounds. You go south of us here in Wyoming, and just about every unit you can bait. But I don't know about the use of hounds in Wyoming. But all three of those states are over the counter.
It's pretty cool. It's very, very, it's over the counter. it's a time of year where most of us don't already have obligations, other than if you're turkey hunting or something like that. And it's a chance to get up in the mountains and
It's beautiful.
hunt.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's a great time to be out there.
Yeah.
And shoot.
Normally, Mark, in 2 nights sitting on those ridges we were on, I would average 2 to 3 bears an evening. But
Well, let's not spoil it quite yet.
okay.
Let's start at the beginning and work our way to tell them how many bears we ended up seeing on these evenings.
Okay. All right.
So
I'll let you lead the discussion then.
yeah. So you told me that that I was welcome to join you on this bear hunt, and the first one I think was last week, Thursday maybe.
Yeah.
So we met at a parking lot. My wife was gracious enough to drive me back and forth to these things. And
I had to sign a waiver that I'd bring you back in one piece.
yeah. And you did that very well. You got me back with no injuries. And I got to meet your cameramen.
Yep.
Your 2 cameramen who are great guys, very cool.
Yeah, Marcus and Michael are good guys.
Yep, that was fun. Holy smokes, though. Michael, your new guy,
Yeah.
he can sweat.
Yeah.
He can sweat up a storm.
Yeah, we'd look back and Michael's hat, we'd be about a fourth the way up the hill, and that dude, he's just pouring it out.
Oh, man, he was too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we went off to this piece of public land, and basically the game plan was to just hike and hike and hike up to the top of this kind of glassing knob or small mountain,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, and we were gonna watch from there. So my first question for you, Randy, was why there? I asked that seriously and a little bit facetiously. Why there?
Yeah.
What was the thought process in our plan there in spending that night there?
And my thought is I always want to get to a place that gives me the greatest amount of view shed. How many places can I glass from that spot? And as you saw, about the only place we couldn't glass was to our south. Mm-hmm. To the east, the west, the north, we had this huge vista for miles. And yeah, some of that out in front of us would have been private. Some of it would have been public. But the idea is when spring bears come out of their dens, and we've had a pretty hard winter here, so my gut's telling me maybe we're a week behind just because of how cold and how much snow we had. Those bears have the feed bag on. They're trying their best to get their digestive tract going again, so they're mowing on the grass and the vegetation. They're maybe looking for winter-killed carcasses. And when you get these stretches of warm days in the Rockies after a long winter, it's usually in late April, early May, you get these 3, 4, 5 days where it gets up in the 70s. And that is when bears seem to come out like crazy, and you see them moving a lot. They're not that stationary in the spring. They're moving, just looking for feed. And so that's why I get to glassing spots. You'll see them moving across the openings. You'll see them moving across the hillside. And the idea is, once I see them, how do I get in front of them? Does it look like they're heading someplace to feed? Is there some really nice green lush spot that as the snow has receded up the hill, up the mountain, a lot of times you get these patches that are just way greener than the rest of the mountain. And usually they're heading to those green spots. And so if I see them, I'm trying to get there. So that was the method to my madness in picking that spot.
Okay, so I will divulge the secret now. That first night, we did not see a bear doing any of those things that you said, but it sure looked like a place that you could.
Right.
I mean, everything you just described there just seemed to be to a T. The view was incredible. The scenery was incredible.
Right. The other thing that I forgot to mention about what I'm looking for, Mark, I'm also looking to be near calving and fawning grounds of elk and deer, because when those elk calves and deer fawns start hitting the ground in late May, early June, those black bears, for them, that's like buffet time. And I know a lot of us are like, oh, I hate thinking about bears eating all these little calves and fawns. But that's just the reality of what goes on out there. So these black bears are tuned into that. They know where these calving grounds are and where these fawning areas are. And how many elk did we see every night?
Oh my gosh, we
100.
saw so many elk.
Yeah.
So many elk and deer, muleys, whitetails. I mean, we didn't see bears, but we saw so many critters. I mean, that was just fun to just sit up there and glass.
That area we went to, for whatever reason that I can't explain, I don't know if it's because of past fires, if it's because of just the mineral content in the soils. In the springtime, I see way more cow elk and doe mule deer and doe whitetails in those basins. And I think that's where they fawn. I think that's where they calve. And I think that's why, as that's happening, the bears know that historically, and they're moving towards that spot.
So that's what I was going to ask. How can you, if I'm not familiar with an area already, how do I determine where these calving grounds are? Is there anything to look for from a habitat standpoint, or do I just need to figure it out by glassing and walking around?
I wish I could tell you that I had some science to it. Fortunately for me, I live here, so I spend a lot of time in these hills, and I see it. If I had to find some characteristics to it, as you know, there's a huge burn there. Those burn areas generate unbelievable amounts of feed, but also quality of feed. And a lactating elk or a lactating deer, they want the highest quality food they can find. So those burns provide that. But even away from the burns, there were still a lot of those animals. And I wish I could tell you what makes I can go to 4 basins that all look the same, but for some reason, 2 of those 4, the elk and deer will select those. The other 2, they'll just kind of disregard. And I'm not smart enough to know why. I wish I could tell you why.
Is there any elevation band? Like you're usually seeing them at a certain height maybe or anything like that?
There is definitely, and we were talking about that on the mountain the other day, about those elevation bands seem to have the same greenness and lushness. And I think that's because of, as the snow, it's somewhat dependent upon where that elevation is to the snow retreating up the hill. Also just geography and geology. The geology of it is you get a lot of faulting and stuff in the mountains. And so you might have one area that's mostly granite, one area that's mostly limestone. And those bands of one or the other are going to have different forage types. A geologist friend of mine taught me this, where he only hunts limestone areas because his experience shows that ungulates prefer feeding in areas with limestone as the soil composition.
Wow.
And I never really thought about that till I started doing it. And I'm like, whoa, look at that.
So that is something you pay attention to now?
I do now.
Wow.
I didn't then. And he's a geologist, so it's interesting to hunt with a geologist. I'm looking at the total landscape. He's looking at we're in a good limestone stretch here. To me, I'm like, who cares if it's limestone, granite, something in between? I don't care if it's mud and bog.
Right.
Well, for him, he understands how that soil composition translates into minerals being absorbed by the plant communities and how the wildlife selects that. It was
fascinating.
Yeah, it was. So there might be areas where it's a function of the elevation, but that elevation might be there just because of the soil composition at that point or at that elevation. So again, in the fall, it's much more pronounced in the fall that, at least for mule deer in hunting season, I see the does and fawns and the young bucks heading down lower, following. So in August, things start drying up in the Rockies and it gets brownish colored. You see with the first snow, often you see the does, fawns, and young mule deer bucks head lower. And then anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 feet in elevation above them, the mature bucks will stage. And they will stage there through the end of October until the first few days of November. And then all of a sudden, the trigger comes on and you see them down lower with the younger bucks and the does and fawns. And,
interesting.
And we've taken, where you and I were bear hunting, we've taken 3 really nice mule deer bucks in those staging areas there.
Wow.
And a lot of people are like, oh, it's not a good place to hunt because when the rut starts, all these bucks drop down onto the private. Well, yeah, they do in the rut because that's where the does are, but they're up on the public in that pre-rut phase.
Just before.
Yeah. So
It seems like that area has been very productive for you.
yeah, we've shot a couple bears in there. We've shot some nice mule deer. Shot a whitetail. We filmed a whitetail hunt in that area. Elk hunt. So it's a good spot. But one thing, and people are starting to realize this when they see our images and they see our video. Someone sent me an email, and that's when it kind of struck me that, oh, people are catching on. And Randy, everything you film, every picture I see of you, you guys are in burns. What's up with all the burns? And I don't want to say there aren't critters in areas that haven't burned, but in the Rockies, the Rockies it evolved as a fire-prone ecosystem. Before man started suppressing fire, these places were burning every 20, 25, 30 years. And so if you talk to the historians and the biologists, they said that before that, our suppression of these fires happened, wildlife would move to wherever these mosaic patterns of burns were at. Well, Randy is kind of like that. These critters. I'm moving to wherever these burns are at. And so that's part of why I think that area in the last 5-6 years has been pretty good. Now, you look at it and those burns are starting to get a little bit older. They're starting to get grown up with new trees. Mm-hmm. And so I might have to abandon that spot in the next few years and start looking for where's the next burn that's 2 or 3 years old.
So here's my 2 questions on that. Number 1, what's the time frame after a burn that's best? So is it 1 to 5 years or whatever that is? And then number 2, how do you go about finding these burns other than just being there in person? Can you actually find them when looking online on maps and stuff like that?
Yeah. I don't know if I want to tell all those secrets, but I'm going to. The first one's easy. I hunt burns certainly within 1 year after the fire. If it's an early summer burn and you get fall moisture, I'll go and hunt that burn that fall.
Wow.
But certainly the next year, possibly up to the next 10 years. Okay. And if there are other burns nearby that they can select from that are newer burns, they're going to go select those newer areas. If it's all nothing but dark timber and that burn is 10 years old, they'll still be in that 10-year-old burn before they'll be in that dark timber. So how long do I hunt them? It just
depends.
A little bit depends. I always like to hunt the freshest burn I can find. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
As far as where to find them, the generic answer is there's a website called InciWeb, INCIWEB, and it'll show you current status of fires. So in the summertime, I can be dialing in and watching that. So am I allowed to plug a product here?
You can do whatever you want, right?
Okay.
You are outside of my control. I take no responsibility. No responsibility for whatever you might do, Randy.
A lot of people know that I use the Onyx map system. And on their cell phone, their smartphone app, the Hunt app it's called, there's a layer called Fire Layers. Goes all the way back to 2000. I can't believe I'm telling everybody this. But that's it. And so you add that layer on your smartphone app, and it will show you what year the fire was. It'll give a polygon outline of where the fire was.
Interesting.
Oh, it's if you're doing desk scouting like I am, I don't know how you do it without having that fire data. If you're thinking of coming out west, and you're in a quandary for where to start, my default is find the burns, and you will find elk. I think or elk, deer, whatever. I think we grow up with this idea, and I think hunters are the worst because we see these hunting magazine pictures and stuff of these big, high meadows, beautiful dark timber around the edges of them. You'll never see me hunting there. I mean, that might look pretty, but if you're an elk or you're a mule deer, you're like, keep right on trucking. There's nothing to eat there.
All right.
So I'm looking at these ugly burns, and the number of elk and deer bedded in those burns is crazy. Most people just, I think visually, they say there's not going to be anything there. Or if it was there, I'd see it standing up. They can bed in that stuff and be just about invisible.
Oh, I imagine.
So it's that's kind of a diversion about how all of that connects to bear hunting, but it is somewhat connected to where I select where I'm going to bear hunt.
Well, and on night number 2 of the hunt, you thought you had spotted a bedded bear in a burn area, close to a burn area.
Yeah.
Too. It did not turn out to be a bear.
I don't think so. Either that or he stayed motionless for 3 hours.
Or several days.
Right, because he was there a couple days earlier also.
But it did look like it certainly could have been one.
Yeah.
And I got excited there for a moment because like, I've got a bedded bear. And I'm like, all right, you think we can get over there in time? And you're like, yeah, we're going to go for it if it's him. And so I got fired up. Day 2, we're going to get on a bear.
Yeah, I feel terrible, Mark. I was about ready to throw my stuff in my pack, and it would have been about, I don't know, mile and a half over there.
Yeah.
It would have dropped about 1,000 feet elevation and had to pick up another 800 going up the other side. But in 2 hours, we would have had time to move in on it. But it turned out not to be a bear.
It was not a bear. And
false alarm.
And that was the story of the rest of night number 2 as well.
Yeah, that's what I tell people, that bear hunting in the spring anyhow is 2 hours of hiking, followed by 3 or 4 hours of bored just glassing, with the hope that boredom is interrupted by 15 minutes of absolute chaos.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it is.
Yeah.
But that's not too much different than tree stand whitetail hunting.
Very true.
You're probably not going to hike for 2 hours, but how often do you sit there thinking, oh man, today's not the day, and all of a sudden you turn and look over your left shoulder and there's Big Hank standing there. You're like, that's instantly big pulse of adrenaline.
Exactly. So I kept telling myself the whole night last night, as the clock was ticking down, I just kept saying, stay focused any second. Like even with only 5 minutes left before we go, that black form could step out and it could be game on.
Yeah.
And it always seems to be whenever you let your guard down, whenever you mentally kind of check out and say, it's not going to happen, woe is me, it seems like when that happens, that's when all of a sudden they show up and you're not ready and you miss your opportunity. So I'm constantly it's like so mental. Any kind of hunting is, obviously. But it's always, how can you stay in it? How can you stay positive and be focused? And many times it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. And I struggle with that. I get bored easily. I must have some sort of attention disorder. But one of the things I found that helps me through that is going to a place where there's a lot of other wildlife.
Yeah.
It keeps me interested to see, oh, wow, three different elk I hadn't seen just walked out into that opening. Or, wow, where'd that group of mule deer come from? Or whatever it might be. And I don't know. It just makes it easier to be encouraged and be excited and keep your eye through the optics on the hillside.
Yeah.
So
yeah, as a hunter, I think most of us are just generally, enjoy watching wildlife and just seeing them do their thing, and that was a blast, just getting to watch so many deer and elk move around, interact with each other, occasionally see us. There was that one cow elk on the first night that came right on up the hill right towards us.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah.
She come from downwind too.
It was bizarre.
I don't know if I can't explain why she would come that close after smelling us. She had to have smelled us coming in from downwind like that. What did you think about seeing whitetails at 6,500 feet?
I was very surprised.
Yeah.
You just assume that these deer would be staying way down low in their bottoms.
Yeah.
And it was just cool. It made me excited to someday want to hunt whitetails up in a place like that. I would never think that you could chase whitetails way up high like that, surrounded by snow-covered peaks, and being up in them.
Yeah.
That is really cool. And it combines my love of mountains with my love of whitetails in the same place. You got to be careful, Randy. You might show up one night. Oh, there's Mark in a tree.
Who's that guy in that tree stand there? Hey. I'll watch if I see a truck with Michigan plates at the trailhead.
You know it's trouble.
I'll be like,
That son
I
of a
can't tell
gun.
this guy any more of my secrets. But, no, it's fun to go and hunt whitetails in spots like that. I have a whole bunch of spots scattered across Montana like that I found them while elk hunting, and I'll never be able to get rid of my whitetail problem. Growing up in northern Minnesota, I think now I've shot 25 bucks since I've moved to Montana.
Wow.
And I think only 4 of those have been mule deer bucks.
Wow.
All the rest have been whitetails.
Yeah.
And if you come to Montana, everyone's got the elk mindset. It's elk, 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 elk. And they should. I mean, we got great elk hunting.
They're cool.
But you will see guys walk through some of the best whitetail hunting on their way elk hunting. And I'm just sitting there. They think I'm taking a break and being lazy. Well, I'm sitting there because I know how many whitetails come trotting through these spots. So it's just cool where you can have that. Because when you were out here last year, you hunted a classic kind of Montana pattern of a riparian area, which that elevation there of where you were hunting is probably 2,000 to 2,500 feet lower than where we were seeing these whitetails the last few days.
Yeah, and it's so cool to have both of those options, to be able to hunt them in either or different types of habitat. You can kind of choose your own adventure.
Yeah,
I like that. And there's so many of those different places. I've been thinking about, do I want to hunt on different places coming fall for whitetails in Montana, or do I go back to the old spot because that was pretty great? And I just recently went shed hunting there and found some nice antlers. That'd be fun. But I also like the idea of exploring these new places and the new, there's something to be said about figuring out the new area, learning the behaviors and the patterns. How do they use this terrain? Where are they coming from? Where are they going to? That's just a part of like the hunt that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
But maybe it hurts my ability to kill more deer because I'm constantly jumping from new spot to new spot. I never take enough time to really figure it out.
What do you think of my idea of the Rocky Mountain whitetail trifecta?
I think it's awesome. I think that sounds like a lot of fun.
So last year we pulled off 2 of the 3. We did Montana. I shot a really nice whitetail buck in Montana. We hopped over the border, northern Wyoming. My buddy Matt Seidel from Onyx Maps shot a really nice whitetail in Wyoming. We need to get, if my calendar would fit it, we need to get Idaho in there because the whole month of November, pretty much, you can hunt whitetails with a rifle in all 3 of those states.
Wow.
And the general population of those 3 states, they drive by all these whitetails looking for elk.
Right.
So if I was a Midwest guy, and I certainly if I lived in the Midwest, I'm not going to miss my peak rut period with my bow. But after that, there's so much public land. You could come and easily do Montana and Wyoming or Montana and Idaho as 2 of the 3. Pick up a tag in most instances over the counter. Maybe in Montana now we're getting more demand for our deer tags, so you might have to apply in the draw. Wyoming, all those good whitetail spots, you can usually get as a leftover tag after the draw. Idaho never sells out all their deer tags, so you can get that over the counter.
Got to watch out because you are talking to a lot of whitetail nuts right now. You might show up for your whitetail trifecta and see dozens of whitetail guys from the Midwest.
If we can't do it in 17, I think in 2018, I can't think of a better guy to do the Rocky Mountain whitetail trifecta with than Mark Kenyon.
I would love to do that.
That's an invitation if you want to take it.
Well, then you've learned the hard way that when you throw these invitations out, I take them. So,
but we do it with rifles, Mark.
I'm fine with that.
You're okay with that?
I'm fine with that. I'll just plan on killing a few with a bow beforehand. I'll head out with the firearm for the trifecta, and that would be a blast. And I would love to see the rut out west here with these whitetails because, back home in a lot of places I hunt, the number of bucks is much lower. The ratio of bucks to does is much lower. The ratio of age structure. Here, the density of deer is incredible.
Yeah.
The age structure seems terrific.
Yeah.
And the number of bucks to does is just
crazy
compared to anything I've seen. So I just cannot imagine the competition for these does that must be going on in November. It's got to be pure chaos.
It is. If you sit in some of these creek bottoms, and I told you this as we were walking off the mountain the other night, that even if they told me I couldn't hunt whitetails here, that I could just watch them, I would have so much fun sitting in these creek bottoms on November 8th because it is chaos. These bucks have to compete so hard because there's so many other bucks, and they are just all day long running like crazy. You'll see them rutting that hard even into Thanksgiving.
That's awesome.
And their tongues are hanging out. They look like they're so withered. You wonder how's this buck gonna make the winter? But
Yikes! Yeah,
somehow they do.
I would love to see that. So I guess I'm coming out.
Okay.
Whenever you decide to do that, I will make that work because that would just be too much fun.
It'd be a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
We do a podcast every night.
I'd be up for that. I think there'd be plenty to talk about.
Yeah. Well,
So-
if each of us had a tag, that'd be 6 tags we'd have to fill. I could do a whole TV season of just whitetails.
That'd be pretty cool. A lot of good YouTube videos, at least.
Yeah,
That's
a lot
for
of
sure.
good YouTube stuff.
That would be awesome. Back to bears, though.
Bears, yeah.
Back to
Sorry.
bears.
See, we get in these
I know, it's
distractions.
easy.
That's part of being whitetail nuts. Everything kind of spirals down
I
that
know.
direction.
And that's really what we should be talking about since this is traditionally a whitetail podcast. But I want to cover a little of this bear stuff because the bears are pretty darn cool.
Yep.
So we didn't end up seeing a bear either night.
No.
But what I want to touch on is in the future, next time I come out, if I'm doing this on my own, or if somebody's listening and they want to try this someday. We've talked a little bit about some of the places to look, but what else does a first-time black bear hunter need to know heading out in the spring somewhere trying to do a spot and stalk hunt? Is there anything we haven't touched on as far as where to look for them, as far as when to be out there, as far as, I don't know, specific glassing techniques or things to consider when you're actually stalking in on them? Anything else that we need to cover there?
Yeah. Let's start with the person who's coming out who's never bear hunted before. If you want to give yourself the best advantage, I'd say come out May 10th through the 20th. Then across all 3 of the states we're talking about, Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, you're going to have bears that are moving around because the bear breeding season starts in late May and runs through about June 15th. So if you want to if you're really focused on, say, a big boar, he's going to be most active the first part of June because he's searching out females. The downside of that is sometimes their hide can be rubbed really, really bad by then. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. But usually
This is a dumb question. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
But being a non-bear hunter, when you say their hides are rubbed up, is that they're just rubbed up on trees?
It's the hair, their winter coat is starting to shed.
Okay.
So it's some of the old boars, it doesn't happen nearly as pronounced as with the sows. The sows, I think they come out of the dens a little earlier, and I've seen some mangy looking sows that just you look at them and you think, my goodness, who would? Not that you select for boars anyhow because bears have a low reproductive rate, so you'd always want to pass on a sow if you possibly can. But rub means they look like they rubbed against a tree. It doesn't necessarily mean they're rubbing against trees. It's just they're transitioning, kind of like your dog is shedding, but they don't shed smoothly. Big patches and chunks come out, and they'll usually the areas that will shed first will be the front legs and then the flanks. And you'll know. You'll look at it. You're like, what's wrong with that bear? And usually it's
mangy.
They're rubbed. Okay. So, but back to the point about where to find them. If you came out May 10th through the 20th, you're going to catch a window there that pretty much every bear is out of their den by that time. It's going to be a little bit dependent upon weather, how far up the mountain they are. For me, I look for, so think about in the springtime, they come out of the den, they got to get their digestive system going again. They've been hibernating for 5 months, 6 months, and they are hitting vegetation heavy at that point. They love the really succulent stuff like flowers, glacier lily, skunk cabbage, more so than just grasses. And a lot of times you'll look up the mountain, and if you take your binoculars or spotting scope, you'll see some of those places that have this deeper green to it, and it also might have a lot of flowers. Looks like flowers.
Okay.
Those are the places I look for. And I'm not a bear expert by any stretch. There's some guys who they have it absolutely dialed in because they've hunted the same mountain range for 20 years. There's nothing that beats that. But you could come out in most places in the Rockies, and if you find those kind of spots that give you multiple places to glass, multiple openings, the odds are you're going to encounter a few bears. And in that area, pay attention to what pattern or what is happening. Okay, I saw this bear at 9,000 feet. Wow, yesterday I saw bears up around 9,000 feet. Well, guess what? There's something at that 9,000 foot level that's attracting them. Yeah. Or it might be the flip side. Okay, wow, I climbed up to 7,500. They're all down at 6,800. Or it might be, all right, they're all on north-facing slopes where the snow still hasn't melted. They're even right on the edge of the snow. These bears are in so many different places. You're going to have a pretty good chance of seeing them. One thing they do like nearby usually is some shady place to bed during the day. You asked me on the mountain the other night, do I ever hunt in the morning? And I don't. I'm not saying that it's not good bear hunting in the morning. It's just that I never do it. And very few of the guys I know hunt in the morning.
I think I've heard this a lot from other people too.
Yeah,
they tend to focus on afternoons for whatever reason. And I don't know if that's just, I don't know if that's a habit that we've collectively formed. Right. But I have, when I first started bear hunting, I spent a lot of time hunting all day long. And I would say overwhelmingly the number of encounters or bears I spotted were from 3 p.m. on till dark. Question about location.
Yeah.
One thing, when I think about chasing elk or deer out west, lots of times it's how do you get as far away from the road as possible, get away from trailheads, get away from other people. Mm-hmm. Is that something you worry about as much with bear hunting or not?
I do, because the stuff near roads and trailheads is going to be hunted harder. And so your age class of bears is going to be much lower. If you do have a bear that came out of its den, say he made the mistake of denning near a trailhead, when he comes out and he's first getting his bearings about him, odds are he's going to get picked off. So, I'm usually hiking a mile and a half from a road or trailheads just because I know that just like elk, even if bears are a little bit more habituated to humans, and sometimes humans provide them food through garbage cans or bird feeders or whatever. General rule is bears want to be away from people also. So those spots where we were glassing, if we would have seen bears in some of those spots, we'd hiked in about a mile and a half. We might have had to run another mile and a half. So we would have been 3 miles from a road at that point. Yeah. So I look for those kind of places.
What about hunting pressure during spring bear season? I'm assuming it's much less than elk or deer.
Way less.
Do you still have to think about it though a decent bit, or?
Yeah, I do. And I know that hunting pressure is going to be really heavy Friday evening, Saturday and Sunday. So if I was traveling out here to do a hunt, I'd want to get here on a Saturday or Sunday, scout a little bit, and then really start my hunting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah. And you'd almost have it to yourself.
That's good to know. Yeah.
And
we had no problems during our weekday hunts.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to plan time to come out, that's what I would do. So
that makes sense.
I mean, the amount of hunting pressure for spring bears compared to deer and elk is not even I don't even think it's 10%.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nice to be out there and not worried about seeing people all the time.
Yeah.
It was really nice being out there. Last night we were talking about, we were just sitting out and, I was a little bit bumming out. We hadn't seen any bears, but I kind of caught myself and I was like, look around you right now. You are surrounded by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of acres of public land stretching in every direction as far as the eye can see. That is, we own title to, and we can roam it, walk it, hunt it, explore it, and it's just I'm constantly in awe when I take a second to step back from whatever I'm focused on and just like look around and be like, this is incredible. There's nobody else out here right now. I don't think there would have been a single other person probably out there. I mean, there could have been, but you would never know it.
If there was, in our 2 nights, we did not see another hunter. We saw some turkeys.
There were a couple hammering off.
Yeah. Any of you have ever taken Mark on a bear hunt when there's some turkeys gobbling down below? You almost have to tether him to a tree.
I did get excited.
I got a kick out of that. That's the first time I'd ever seen turkeys way up in those drainages like that. I have no idea what they're doing up there.
They were gobbling off.
Yeah, because the first time you told me you heard one, I said, "Oh, that's a sandhill crane."
Yeah, I was like, "Man, am I going crazy?" I could have swore that was a turkey, but I trusted you.
Then even my bad hearing, I'm like, "Whoa, that is turkey."
That is a turkey.
And Mark can call them without a call.
That was fun. They were responding. Just a little yelping I was doing there.
Yeah.
But to something you mentioned a second ago, I want to touch on, because this is one of the things I was worried about the most when I was planning on going on my own. You mentioned the fact that we should be targeting boars and not sows because of the fact that they've got that low reproductive rate. And I had been worried, like, oh my gosh, am I going to screw up and misidentify? How do I tell the difference between a male and a female? So I tried to watch some videos. I tried looking at pictures and doing different things like that. But it's a little hard to do this without showing. But what can you tell us about identifying a male versus a female black bear? How do you do that?
The obvious one is if the sow has cubs. Before I go after a bear, I watch it for as long as I think is good, because I don't want to run over there, get all excited, and then I get there and here comes a cub or 2 little cubs walking out of the brush. That's your first indicator that it could be a sow. If there's cubs, just enjoy the view and watch and observe. If there aren't any cubs, I tell people, if you went to the supermarket and bought a pear and laid it on its side, you'd have one side of it is like tall and one side of it is narrow. Well, a sow black bear kind of looks like a pear from a side profile. Its rump looks really big, and it gets really dainty out towards the front. Whereas a boar, he looks like a big russet potato. I mean, he's big in the rump, he's big in the shoulders, he's big in the neck.
Just a refrigerator walking across the line.
So if you see him at a side profile and they have a smaller front end than they do a back end, you can just about bet that it's a sow. Then if you see them straight on, a boar is going to have these big shoulders. They almost look bull-legged when they're walking. I mean, their front legs are bowed almost, and they waddle more than walk. If you can see it from straight on through your spotting scope and it's a sow, its shoulders are going to look very dainty and narrow, and it's going to walk almost with one foot in front of the other instead of this swagger. And then as far as the head, a boar is going to have a much bigger head than a sow. A sow is going to look like mostly nose and ears. A boar, a mature boar, his ears are going to be over towards the side of his head instead of like a sow. Her ears are going to be on the top of her head. There's not one definitive thing, but there's a multitude of things. If you start looking at it, if you've got quite a bit of a gap between the ears, odds are you got a boar. If there's not much gap there, and those ears look pretty big relative to the head, odds are you have a sow. So
that's helpful.
There's not an absolute science to it. When you do see a sow with cubs and you absolutely know that's a sow, observe her for a long time and just try to get a feel for what those traits of her body is, and you'll quickly be able to say, Next time, that's probably a sow.
Yeah.
So
There's something just about watching bears that I find so cool. Like, I think they are such interesting animals. The things they do or interact, and I've watched a sow with cubs, both black or grizzly, and just seeing how they interact, the things they do. I don't know. There's just something really neat about bears. I can sit and just watch them for hours.
no, I think bears are the most comfortable animal. When I say comfortable, they just go about their business, and they really aren't like deer and elk. They're always like spring loaded,
On
ready.
edge.
A bear is just, I'm a big bad dude. I'm here doing what I'm doing. I'm making noise. I don't care. I'm tearing up roots or snapping off trees or whatever. And this is who I am. I own the joint.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun to watch them. One of the things that is interesting as you get towards late May when you're watching them, I've seen boars try to interact with sows. And if they have cubs, those sows will run those cubs up those trees immediately, because a boar, he wants that sow to come into heat. So he will kill. One of the greatest problems with bear reproduction can be boars killing the offspring of other boars. So he will kill those cubs. And you'll see those sows instantly run those cubs up that tree. And she is acting ornery. And you'll see him come walking around, and she's like, "You want some of this, buddy? I'm going to whoop you." And so it's kind of funny to watch. I enjoy watching them try to interact in late May. It's very entertaining.
Yeah. That's the one thing I'm just so bummed about is, like, I literally could do what we did last night 7 days in a row, 10 days in a row. I wish I had more time to sit and watch. And if I lived out here, I'd be doing this a lot.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
I am lucky to live in a place where I get to go do that. For, last night you asked me how many days will I sit on these mountains just in May. And, just here in Montana, it's probably going to be 6 to 10 days this year of just sitting and observing. Whether or not I'm lucky enough to find a bear, I don't know. And then I'm going to try to go to Idaho in early June and do the same thing. So I don't know. It's good exercise. It's great fun. And I learn a lot when I'm out there. No matter what it is, I'm learning something about that species, whether it's the deer or elk I'm looking at, or bears, or just learn something about how that landscape is being used by the wildlife.
Yeah.
So
It seems like if you open your eyes to it, there's a lot that you can take in from any situation like that if you just pay attention, if you notice things.
Yeah.
So I have two more kind of practical questions I'm curious about.
Okay. I'm an impractical guy, so take your chances here.
I think a lot of people, when switching from being just if I've only ever hunted deer, one of the things a lot of people ask is, what kind of firepower do I need? Do I need to change my archery setup? Do I need to change my rifle setup, firearm setup? What's your recommendation there? Can I use my whitetail gear to hunt a black bear?
I'd use all my whitetail gear.
Same stuff.
Whether it's your bow or your rifle.
Okay.
We've shot black bears with a 270, 7mm 08, 300 Win Mag, 308. I mean, classic whitetail calibers. Some people say, "Oh, I can't believe you'd hunt black bears with a 7mm 08. You know what? If you hit a black bear in a vital spot with a 140 grain Accubon or good high quality bullet, partition, whatever it is, that bear's not going anywhere. If you hit that bear in the vitals with a 60-pound draw weight bow with a good sturdy broadhead, guess what? If that broadhead's sharp, that bear's not going very far.
Yeah.
That's so. I if I was coming out here, I wouldn't invest an extra dime in equipment. If I was a rifle hunter, I'd just make sure I was using some sort of premium constructed bullet.
Okay. Well, that's nice. The barrier to entry, again, very low. Very low. For a whitetail guy, bring your same kit.
Yep.
Buy an over-the-counter tag, hike up a hill, and look around a lot, and have fun.
Yep.
So then my final question would be then, I wish I had to be dealing with this situation right now, but next year I will. Can you give us some advice on eating black bears? Some ways to prepare or make sure that, because some people give the black bears a bad rap.
Yeah.
Say they're greasy or whatever. How do you go about it so black bears are fun for the dinner table?
Yeah. And for a little background, growing up in northern Minnesota, my dad used to set out bait stations for bear hunters. And that was all fall bear hunting in September. So those bears had been on berries all summer. And they almost had a sweet taste to them. In some of those places, it was hard to find a strong tasting black bear when they'd been on berries all summer. In the springtime, I'm just going to, let people understand that those bears probably ate an elk gut pile just before they went in the den. And they've been sleeping for 4 or 5 or 6 months, however long they've hibernated, and they've just come out. They're going to be a stronger taste. They don't have the fat like they do in the fall. Just their body hasn't been circulating enough vegetation and food through them. So the spring bears are definitely stronger than a fall bear. You'd asked me the other night how I prefer to cook a bear. I'd prefer to take a bear roast, a rump roast, or whatever, and slow cook it in a crock pot or whatever. I just like almost a stew type thing with carrots, pearl onions, some potatoes, some flavors, however you prefer to flavor it. Sometimes I'll cook it that way, and then I'll take it out real quick, and I'll put a little rub on it, and I might throw it on the grill just for a quick sear to it. I don't steak my back straps on a bear like I do an elk or a deer. I cook it as a whole loin roast. And the only worry I always have with bears is they have a pretty high incidence of trichinosis. And so depending on who you talk to, most will say you want to cook that thoroughly at least to 165 degrees throughout. Mm-hmm. I don't like well done meat. So I will, with that backstrap, it kind of has this round, it looks like a big long round cylinder of meat. I will cut that lengthwise so that then I know the interior will get cooked quicker without having to torch the outside. Yeah. And with those, I usually just put a rub on it. And for me, simpler is easier. There's a lot of guys who render their bear fat, stuff like that. I've never done that. I always worried it's going to go rancid on me. It used to be in Montana that if you shot a bear, that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks would test it for trichinosis. Mm-hmm. Now that's voluntary, and you have to pay the expense to get it tested for trichinosis. We both know another guy who's been on our podcast. Yeah. His crew ended up, the Meat Eater crew, they ended up with trichinosis.
They learned this the hard way.
Yeah.
Even though they knew about it beforehand.
Right. That was the part where I'm like, Steve be honest, come on, you guys knew better than that. But I've always been a little bit leery of that with bears.
Yeah.
And I've never had one test positive for trichinosis, so I don't know what the frequency of trichinosis is. But if you're cooking bear meat, just make sure that as a safety, make sure you get it above I think most would tell you 165 is you want to get it above that.
I've seen that too when I was doing my reading.
But for me, I cook bear a lot like I cook elk. Pretty much any elk recipe works good for bear.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to putting that to the test a year from now. And now, I don't know if I'll actually be able to do this, but correct me if I'm wrong, but my bear tag is still good for the fall season too, right?
Yep.
So if I fill my deer tag early, I could
go bear hunting.
Go look for some bears.
And you will see the bears here in the fall are far more concentrated than they are in the spring. They are on berries. The black bears, anyhow, are on berries heavy in the fall. And you will go into these brushy creek drainages, and if you sit there and watch, you will see these bears just pulling these limbs down and mowing on anything that looks like a berry, a huckleberry, choke cherries, where we were at the last 2 nights. Those kind of purplish drainages you see, those were in the fall. Those are just laden with choke cherries.
Just looked
and
like they should
I
be in
can't
there.
tell you how many fall bears I've seen in there.
Interesting.
Just going after it. So
I'm not going to give up on my 2017 bear tag yet. There could be a fall bear in my future, maybe.
could be.
That
would be great.
That would be cool. If I could get a deer, if I can draw that antelope tag on a pronghorn, and then pull off a bear.
That would be something. You do bear, whitetail, and pronghorn in one trip. Ooh.
That'd be pretty wild.
That would be really cool. It's doable.
Possible. I don't know how likely, but possible.
It's possible.
So I've got that to look forward to, I guess.
Yeah, I'll be out elk hunting in September. If you're out this way, I'll keep my eyes out for black bears.
Yeah.
And if I find where one's hanging out, I'll let you know.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might.
That is one thing in the 3 states we're talking about is there's also grizzly bears.
Mm-hmm.
Where we were last night, you saw the big sign that says, "Hey, caution,
Oh yeah,
grizzly bear area." And there definitely are grizzlies in these places. You can go to other parts away from the greater Yellowstone area that has fewer grizzlies, or in northwest Montana, there's grizzlies there. I don't worry about it that much. This time of year, grizzlies are looking for carcasses. They're still feeding on vegetation also, but they're, now that I say this, I'll get eaten by one weekend or something.
I hope not.
I hope not. But I've seen
really
grizzlies when I've been out black
fall.
bear hunting, but they seem to kind of keep to themselves.
Yeah.
They're not in that state of hyperphagia like they are in September and October. So they're pretty methodical, just lumbering around, doing their thing, digging for rodents or eating vegetation. Or if you find a carcass, if you find a winter kill carcass in grizzly country, there's a good chance that a bear is going to be working that carcass. But don't let that scare you. There is a reason that I don't call bears in grizzly country. My experience has been when you call for bears and they come, they're coming. You almost have to throw a rock at them to change their mind. Well, if that's a big silver-tip grizzly, I don't want that problem, because if I have to shoot it in self-defense, I've got a serious problem.
It's no good either way.
I may not escape without a few scratches and bite marks. So there's just all kinds of reasons and problems why I don't call bears in grizzly country.
Yeah.
Some would say, "Oh, you're a chicken, Newberg," but that's fine. I just don't need the headache that might come with it. So.
And it seems like your current strategy works just fine most of the time. So no need to.
Yeah. And it would have been fun if we could have brought one of the, what I'll call, just serious fanatic bear hunters with us. I consider myself pretty casual about the bear hunting. I go and do it, but there are some guys who that's what they live for. It's bear season, and then there's the rest of the year. And if we would have had one of those guys with us, you would have seen someone who was really wired differently.
Yeah.
You'd look at him like, oh, man, this guy he's got something going on with bears. So I just admit up front, I've shot my share of bears, but I don't consider myself an expert. I just go and do it a lot where I get to observe quite a few things.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's been really interesting to be able to learn from you and hear how you've been doing things and observe, and very helpful. So I'm really glad that my first bear hunt I was able to tag along and learn versus I'd probably just walk in circles on a mountain by myself. And
you would have seen as many bears doing that as you did with me. So
I guess that's possible. Yeah.
You got to go on your first bear hikes, not bear hunt.
True. This fall.
All right. Now, briefly, we're going to pause for our weekly segment with our friends at Whitetail Properties. And producer Spencer Newharth has a great guest expert today who's going to give us some advice for those who might be in the beginning stages of looking for their own little piece of whitetail paradise.
This week with Whitetail Properties, we are joined by Jeff Probst, a land specialist out of northern Missouri. And Jeff is going to be telling us about what kinds of questions you should be asking when looking at a new property.
Well, there's a lot of questions when it comes to buying a piece of ground, particularly for hunting. One of the most important things, the key components, is the neighbors. It's probably the most asked question I get as an agent that specializes in land and particularly hunting ground. Obviously, if you've got neighbors that aren't like-minded or, could be bad neighbors, it's going to cause some problems for you. I think the key component is to know the neighborhood you're buying into, try to get a good idea of the neighbors and what their goals are, what their thoughts are in terms of what they're hunting or shooting, And that is probably one of the key components. Another question is does the farm have, what kind of income does the farm have? Actually, that may be the most important of all to some folks. But, the income potential on the farm. I mean, is there CRP on the farm? If so, when does that CRP expire? And is it, when does it run out? Number two, is there a tillable agreement on the farm to rent the crop ground out? And who's the farmer? And is the farmer reputable? Does he pay good? Is his rates good? And what does that program consist of? Key components to the farm is obviously you want to have good cover for bedding, for security to hold the deer, and you obviously need food.
If you'd like to learn more and to see the properties that Jeff currently has listed for sale, visit whitetailproperties.com/props. That's PROPST.
So I want to kind of switch gears.
Sure.
Because the other thing that's been on my mind a lot while we were out here doing these bear hunts was, the fact is we were hunting on public land.
Yep.
And of all the people I know, there's few people I know that are more tapped into what's going on with public land these days than you. You've been a great resource for our audience, coming on the show a couple times and talking about kind of introducing our audience to this whole threat of the public land transfer and some of these things. Back in 2016 you talked about that. And I think our audience is very well versed on the basics of that now. I talk about it a decent bit. It's been something that I've been passionately following myself now for the past few years. But can you bring us up to speed on what's been going on recently? What are the things,
Sure.
We've talked about the whole HR 621 deal, but I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on, since the election, there's been all sorts of talk of different things. What's on your mind now? What are the things that have changed or might be changing or that we need to be aware of on this issue?
Yeah, and when I was on a year ago, and we talked about the whole transfer of the public lands to the states, I think the level of awareness and understanding of that topic has increased dramatically, not just in the West, throughout the country. And people now realize that the Western state land boards are not very hunter and shooter friendly. So transferring these lands to them is a bad idea. And there's been so much pushback on that you're starting to hear some of these Western congressional delegates walk away from that idea because the hunting community has done a great job of making that political poison. We have made it obvious that transferring these lands is akin to preparing them to sell them. And that is the reality. Now, these people, these elected officials have had to try to answer some questions of, well, what's in the details of that? Well, they stumble and fumble and look like fools. And so I think that phase is starting. They're starting to pivot and say, boy, that's political suicide. Let's not talk about selling the lands. We learned that in the 80s and 90s, that if we talk about selling them, we're going to get thumped. Now, that marketing strategy we had about transferring them, we're getting thumped pretty hard on that also. Yeah. So now it's morphing into a more nuanced idea of let's cut agency budgets. Let's cut this. Let's impair the value of these lands. Let's not fund all of the management actions. Let's not fund all the backlog of repairs and maintenance. Let's not give the agencies money to do their work so people get frustrated with the agency. You and I were talking about how I need public land film permits. So I've been calling this forest saying, I need a film permit to go bear hunting. Not where we were hunting, but in a different state. Well, their budgets have been cut so much that where there used to be one permit officer, not just for film permits, but all permitting, special events and all kinds of stuff. One officer per forest, now that person might cover 4 or 5 districts. And that's an example of, well, if we cut their budgets, their ability to do their job is less and less, and people are going to get frustrated. And the more frustrated the masses are, the greater the likelihood of us being able to convince them to sell it, to somehow change ownership, to whatever.
So you do think that even though they may be pulling back in some of their statements or proposals as to a transfer or a sale, that's still the end game. But they're going to be approaching it by death by million cuts with all these different budget cuts or whatever it might be that can eventually lead to maybe changing public opinion in some way so they can get away with this.
Right. And things like, we're going to say we're giving the Forest Service more money this year, but we're going to give it all to firefighting costs. We're going to cut their daily work of their logging programs, their road programs, their whatever program it might be, wildlife programs, conservation programs, watershed programs. We're going to cut all that. We're going to give them more money in firefighting. And then we can tell everybody, look what we did. We gave the Forest Service more money. Well, that doesn't do them any good to do the things that require active land management. And it's again part of this strategy of that. I think they've hit the reset button that, guess what? We're not going to accomplish this in the next 5 years. Let's set a goal of accomplishing it in the next 20 years. And we will starve these agencies on the vine. And there's no doubt, you ask anybody, there's always places for improvement. But the Forest Service, if I remember right, and I might have my numbers wrong, but in relative numbers, it's going to be pretty close. The Forest Service had, back in the 90s, if they had 50,000 employees then, they're down to 25,000 employees now.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're about half of what they were in the 90s as far as employees.
Jeez.
And so the demand on them keeps growing, though. We want you to do this now. Guess what? We've got an invasive weed problem across the West. We want you to take care of the invasive weeds. Guess what? We're having more catastrophic wildfires across the West. As we suppress them, the ones that pop up get bigger and bigger. So there's all these growing demands on them, and their budgets are getting cut and cut and cut and cut and cut. So I'm all about smaller government. I'm all about efficiency. But you reach a point where you're no longer cutting fat. You're no longer cutting meat even. You're cutting the bone. And a lot of these forests, a lot of the BLM lands, a lot of these federal agencies, it's impractical to think they're going to be able to do all the things we ask them to do. And Congress knows that. And so here's kind of the irony of it in my mind. Every frustration that the public has that relates to public lands or public land management could be fixed by Congress. Every single one of them, whether it's a priority, whether it's a policy, whether it's a budgetary issue. And what do they do? The greatest critics right now hold the Senate committees that oversee public lands and the House committees that oversee public lands. And there's not a single bill they've introduced to address any of these supposed frustrations we have. None, zero. They've introduced crazy bills like, on your podcast, you talked about Congressman Chavez from Utah had House Bill 621 and 622.
Yeah.
None of those solve any of the frustrations we're talking about. So are these people serious about better land management now that they have all the power and they ignore it and they keep focusing on things that impair the land or go down crazy paths? It's hard for me to believe that they have any intent of better land management, and they still have the intent that someday, somehow, we're going to make these lands so impaired, so degraded, that the public won't have any problem getting rid of them. It might take us 20 years, but if that's what it takes, that's what we're going to do.
So these types of things, it's not just even hypothetical, right? These types of cuts, they are happening already. This is happening. Here's what I worry about, and I think it's probably to your point by design, that it's harder for the average guy or girl to be able to keep track of all these different things and to know, like, how do I make a difference? Because when something like 621 came out, it was so easy. It was they want to sell 3.3 million acres, and that's like a very easy thing to say, whoa, that doesn't sound good. Rally people around it, and you can make a lot of noise and make a difference. It's a lot harder to say, well, there's 16 different cuts, and there's all these different this deregulation here is going to hurt our water, and this is going to hurt whatever. I mean, how do we as hunters and anglers and sportsmen and women, what do we do with all this? Because it seems really tricky.
It is, Mark, and that's what's going to make it harder, is when it's one big target coming at you. You can dodge that bullet, 621. Or, right now, Congressman Amadei from Nevada has this bill introduced. I can't remember the number. I should, but I can't. But it's, if you are adjacent to a piece of public land, we can sell you any of these parcels under 160 acres. Well, there's a lot of 160 acre parcels that control access to 10,000 acres.
He's saying we'll sell the public land to you if you're adjacent to it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a crazy bill. So ones like that are easy targets.
Yeah.
And you can almost look at, all right, who's behind some of these ideas, like Amadei from Nevada. He's a stated, he's a Chavez, Rob Bishop disciple. So you can kind of look at some of that stuff and say, I don't think they want to change this to our benefit. Their history shows that that's not what their goal is. But it does require more vigilance at this point, because every one of these changes are going to be more subtle and more nuanced. I just go back to the position of these public lands are of value, and I continue to impress upon any elected official I talk to. These lands are important to me. Don't buy into this foolishness that someone may be pitching you that, oh, this is no good, or that's no good, or we don't need this, or we don't need that. When you have an approach that is so many little cuts, as you called it, if you tried to chase every one of those little rabbit trails, you'd wear yourself out. At this point, I think it's important for people to contact their elected officials and say, these public lands, this is what I use them for. This is how important they are. Any public land issue that comes up, I hope you will consider that I value these public lands. They're a big part of who I am, what I see America to be. And I contact elected officials even if there's not a fire. I want them to be reminded, every couple of weeks, maybe they get an email or a phone call, or if I see them at an event, hey, just want to make sure you understand that all these public land things, I'm about doing things to improve the value of public lands, not impair the value. And again, that I always worry that some of these things we ask people to do goes back to, high school civics class.
Right.
But there is some of that to it. Say it's a congressperson from Wisconsin who really, they have northern Wisconsin, they've got some national forests, but they don't have much for BLM land or whatever. If that person is hearing time and again, hey, public lands are a priority for me. Public lands are a priority for me. And they hear that enough times, even if it's not their, priority issue, when that topic comes up, it's not going to just be rubber stamped according to, oh, I'm just going to, toe the party line here. So it's, I wish I could tell you that, there's this or that. But as a general rule, now it's all about how do we impair these lands? How do we degrade them? How do we cut agency budgets? Let's not fix any of the frustrations. Let's let the frustration continue. Let's let the frustration build. let's continue the attack on quote unquote the Fed, even though the Fed is Congress.
It's them, right?
Yeah. And I always point that out to them. Make sure whenever a congressperson or senator complains about the Feds, make sure and remind them that they are the Fed.
Right.
They are. And they want to say, oh, the bureaucrat this, the bureaucrat that. Well, the local BLM range manager or the local Forest Service ranger, he doesn't set the policy. He doesn't set the budget. This all comes from D.C.
And in most cases, that is a local person.
Right. Yeah, they're the person coaching Little League or, the volunteer at the fire department or whatever. They're just living in the community. They got the marching orders from D.C. And D.C. is counting that we continue to accept the paradigm that they shouldn't be responsible and that it's those damn feds. They hope we continue to think that way. Mm-hmm. I refuse to think that way. And I try to encourage other people that if you have a frustration about your public lands, make sure and contact your congressperson or your senator and say, what are you doing about this?
Yeah.
Because odds are they're not doing anything about it.
It's an interesting strategy you mentioned here because, to your point, these people complain or make statements about these issues for which we need to transfer or sell these public lands because the federal government can't manage it. But in reality, they are the ones inhibiting that management or not allowing the budgets to get there. And I'm curious about another aspect of this, and I think it's some of what you're referring to here, but what we're seeing now in some cases is now deregulation of a lot of things that impact public lands. And regulations are such a dirty word, and almost always we hate regulation, or many people talk about, it's we're over-regulated to death. Lots of times we talk about. But in these types of cases, are there some issues of deregulation that are happening that are going to be negatively impacting our public lands and leading towards these goals that some of these people have? Impacting clean air, clean water, things
Guaranteed.
along those lines.
Look at the people who are trying to roll back regulations on clean water. Mm-hmm. I struggle to understand how the world leader where the cradle of conservation was, this is where conservation was born and grew from, is the United States. And we're having discussions about how clean our water should or shouldn't be. I'm trying to figure out what's bad about clean water.
Uh-huh.
I'm not going to say there aren't instances where maybe some employee of an agency oversteps and doesn't use common sense. But to use those 1 in 1,000 examples for purposes of reducing water quality standards, I can't go there. Clean air, clean water, productive lands, that's everything my life is built around, is conservation. And anyone who wants to get on these ideological bandwagons of, the EPA this, blah, blah, blah. You know what? They're going to make some mistakes. Every agency, we all are going to make a mistake along the way. But there's a reason the Cuyahoga River isn't on fire today. Mm-hmm. Because we have clean water standards. There's a reason that we have the best drinking water, the cleanest water system that we've known in our lifetimes, is because of these regulations and because of these agencies. What do we want to do? We want to go back to when, whatever it might be. So where we're sitting right here, 90 miles west of here is the largest Superfund site in the world. It's the Berkeley Pit in Butte, Montana.
Yeah.
Prior to clean water regulations, that killed the entire river from Butte, Montana, down to Missoula.
Clark's Fork, right?
Mm-hmm. Do we want to go back to that?
But jobs, Randy, right?
Right. Butte is the largest city, I believe, in the United States that does not have potable water. Wow. Has to bring their water in over a mountain pass. Is that what we want to go back to? So this kind of talk is, it just dumbfounds me that we in the United States are even having that kind of a discussion. And if anyone listening can tell me why we need dirtier water, I'm always open to differing opinions. And I some of these politicians, I said, well, tell me why we need dirtier water. And they just look at me like, well, you know.
It comes down to these party lines, though, right? Where you
does.
if I am going to be associated with this branch or this party, then I have to agree. Always have to deregulate. Always have to prioritize jobs, or always.
Right.
And if I disagree with this, you're afraid to say it, or you're afraid you're an apologist for it.
Exactly.
How do we break out of that? Because I feel like there's so much of that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have the answer. I can tell you how I've broke out of it. I am not an apologist for anybody. The only thing I'm an apologist for is clean air, clean water, productive lands, public lands, wild places, and wildlife. The rest of it, you know what? If you're against that stuff, I'm not making any apologies for it, even if I voted for you. There's a lot of times I vote for somebody, and then they come up with a dumb idea. If anybody can help sway them to the point of common sense and give them some confidence that, hey, if I buck the system, I'm not going to lose my position, it's those of us who voted for them. I think we as a group, collective country, have fallen into this apologistic mindset that, oh, if I voted for the person, I can't criticize them.
I gotta defend them.
Yeah. No, not me. And I think in some respects, if we would flex our muscle to say, hey, we're going to push back when you toe the party line or you come up with some crazy idea, then they would be more inclined to, one, listen to us, but realize, you know what, I can buck the system and I'm going to have some support out there. This whole rollback of everything as it relates to clean air and clean water is a hard one for me to understand. And I'm a pretty conservative guy, but I thought the United States aspired to have cleaner air and cleaner water. Yeah. And none of the people who I get the fortune or misfortune, whatever you want to call it, of being involved in a lot of conference calls and other discussions of stuff that's going on in D.C. And none of the people behind the ideas that we need to get rid of cleaner air and cleaner water, none of them have given me their reasons or their ideas of how they're going to make our air cleaner or our water cleaner. I don't think they're trying to change all this to make our air and water cleaner.
Yeah.
If they are, their track record doesn't demonstrate that. And if there's anything more basic to our life necessities of clean air and clean water, I think we probably take it for granted. And this is where, I'm kind of an old codger. I'm 52, you're 29. I remember before unleaded gasoline, you would go to a large city and every city had smog. Even a city of 50,000 people had smog.
Wow.
I remember the Rainy River where I grew up in northern Minnesota. You didn't eat the walleyes out of Rainy River because of the paper mill upstream in International Falls and Fort Francis. There were warnings, do not eat these fish right below there. Why? And it's not like at that time people said, oh, I want to pollute the river. Some of it was we just didn't know what effect it was having at that time. But now, through regulation, through change, through better ideas, that's just an example. Water quality has improved. The fishing has improved. So many things have improved as a result of it. Is that really where we want to go back to?
But Randy, if you're talking about the environment and stopping pollution and clean air, you're a far left wingnut.
If that's what people want to call me, I don't really care. I mean, I'm not. I own more guns than any far left wingnut I know. If you come to my house, I'm sure ATF would be like, man, this guy kind of preparing for Armageddon here or what? But
it's supremely frustrating though. Sometimes if you say that you care about these things, like why can't a hunter, angler, a firearm owner also care about these things? It's necessary to what we love to do.
That's a great question, Mark. I almost say, how could they not care
Right.
about it?
Right.
It's so critical to the things we love. And I do worry that in my community that I identify with the most and where my platforms are mostly heard is the hunting world. I worry that the hunting world isn't going to stand up and be counted. This is our time. This is, if we don't stand up, we want to take credit for being the original conservationists, going back even before Roosevelt. We go back to Grinnell. We go back to Marsh. We go back to way back, Audubon. All of those people were hunters. And they were the ones who started planting the seeds of conservation. And we want to claim that mantle today. How can you claim that I am the carrier of the torch of conservation, but I'm going to stand silent when we decide we're going to have cleaner or dirtier air and dirtier water? Tell me how you can reconcile that. I can't.
And where's our credibility when outsiders look at that?
Right.
And we try to carry that mantle.
Right.
And we try to use that as some type of...
And we, because of peer pressure or whatever it is, ideological pressure, we become apologists for those people who want to make our water dirtier or our air dirtier. We run a risk. I think the hunting community and the fishing community, we run a risk of losing our credibility and our claim to the mantle of conservation if we stand silent when this stuff goes on.
And this isn't just important for the integrity of the resource, but also I think for the future of the right to do what we're doing. Because I think a big part of how we communicate to the non-hunting public about why hunting is relevant and valuable still today is because of our role as conservationists.
Right.
And if they look at that and say, okay, you claim to be conservationist, and then they see, well, you only care about the 3 animals you want to shoot. You don't care about the clean air. You don't care about the clean water. You're not concerned about these bigger things. You just want your gun and you want to be able to shoot deer. Then I think we don't have a whole lot to stand on there.
The rest of society is way more perceptive than that, and we're going to look like hypocrites. Mm-hmm. I know that might be uncomfortable for some people to have to come to that conclusion, but the time is now to say, am I a conservationist or am I a hypocrite? Am I going to roll up my tent because someone I voted for is, I don't want the discomfort of my, one of my coworkers or somebody else giving me grief because I voted for the same guy, but man, if I stand up and speak on behalf of clean air or productive lands or whatever it is, I'm going to get grief about it. Well, if that's if that's enough to sway you from speaking up, then the question becomes, are you really committed to conservation? Mm-hmm. I mean, Roosevelt said it. The wildlife and its habitat cannot speak for itself. We must, and therefore we will. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was 120 years ago that he said that, or 115 years ago.
Just as true today.
It's absolutely true. And I've been in my speaking presentations and some YouTube clips we're working on. And I told you this story the other day about where you were camped.
Yeah.
That was going to be a reservoir. And
it blows my mind.
No, I'm working on this series of stories about how conservation has never been easy, it's never been convenient, and it's never been comfortable. And if we think now we can just bail out whenever it gets hard, or we can walk away because it's not a convenient time, or, you know what, that's a pretty uncomfortable discussion to have, so I'm just going to ignore it. If we do that, we are going to lose our credibility as the leaders of conservation. It's going to be damaging for us in the hunting and angling community, and it's going to be really damaging for the landscapes and the wild creatures that depend on it.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
Even if you don't care about this like ideologically, just as a pragmatist, like just thinking about the
yeah.
just purely if you want to focus on your individual future ability to do the things you like to do. Even if you aren't super passionate about these things, but you just want to, I still want to be able to fill my freezer. It just makes sense that we need to be caring about these things and doing something about these things.
Yeah.
And to your point, I mean, we've both experienced, you to a much larger degree, I'm sure, than myself, but we've faced blowback for things we talk about that's uncomfortable or outside of the party line or whatever it might be. And I think to your point, we have to be confident in our beliefs and willing to stand up for these things. And, you know, it's not always going to be rainbows and butterflies and big bucks and bulls.
No. I mean, I spoke out pretty loud on some of these things in the last week, and my emails and private messages and Facebook messages have been pretty pointed. But that implies that I'm worried about the blowback. I am not. If I'm 52, I don't know if I've got 1 day, 1 year, 1 decade, or 30 years left on this planet. But whatever it is, I'm not going to take a leave of absence about making the landscapes better, more productive for my kids, my hopefully grandkids, or the next generations. I'm just not. And if that it comes with risks for sure. It comes with pressures. It comes from those days when, you know, someone you appreciate who you've had a friendship with calls you up and says, Newberg, you off your rock? Yeah, maybe I am. But guess what? I'm not standing here letting a political tide roll back everything that the hunters and anglers before me have fought for the last 150 years. I'm not. And if that causes a wrinkle in our friendship, I guess maybe we didn't have as good a friendship as I thought.
Yeah.
It just, for me, you know, as someone who has platforms like you do, I think it's more incumbent than ever on us to provide some voice and leadership to these causes. Because if we fold up the tent, we've been granted these privileges, these amazing lives of being spokespeople for these causes. And if I decide, oh, it's a little too tough a sledding here, I think I'm going to just bail out for a couple of years. Well, guess what, Randy? You shouldn't have these platforms then. That's my thought on it.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right.
So,
and I think to all this that we've just been talking about here, you know, we started our conversation with public land, some of the threats to public land. But some of these things we're talking about more recently, this applies to whether you hunt public land out west or you hunt the 30 acres behind your house in New York.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a nationwide issue. This impacts all of our hunting, fishing, hiking, camping, breathing, no matter where you live. So I think that this is one of those very clearly core issues to all of us that is, it's unfortunate sometimes that we, I don't know, because we don't want to be associated with a different group or because we're uncomfortable with the same people that talk about this and march on this. They're different than me. But you know what? We actually do care about some of the same things too, and we can look past some of these differences because in the end, we need a couple core things here that we all care about.
Yeah, there's a bumper sticker in Montana, and I'm going to get it a little bit off when I say it, but it's something of gay hippie loggers for Jesus. And it's kind of, the subtitle is, I don't care who you are, open minds and different perspectives are helpful. And whenever I see that bumper sticker, I kind of chuckle because coming from a logging family, I kind of think about, that covers the whole spectrum right there.
Pretty fun.
But it's usually, and it usually has some little subtitles around it. But when you were talking about how no matter who you associate with or where you come from as your own kind of personal beliefs on these topics, we got to get to the point where we can say, yeah, we disagree on some things, but on this topic, I don't care what your opinion is on topic C. Mm-hmm. On topic A, if you're for conservation and healthy landscapes and water and clean air, We'll sort out the differences on the other stuff at a different time. I'm not going to run scared and hide because someone's going to say, oh, I saw you at a meeting and you were talking to so-and-so. Well, yeah, guess what? So-and-so is concerned about productive lands just like I am. We're in that weird time where it's, people want to find ways to move everyone over to their own little corner. It's who can build the biggest army in a little corner rather than let's build big armies, big coalitions in the middle for the important things.
And it's easy to completely filter your whole world into these little things. Like, I only get news from this little tiny viewpoint, and my whole social media feed is just people that think exactly like I do.
Right.
And it's really easy to get stuck in these little corners. Maybe even you're completely unaware of it.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, like last night we were talking about this, and we were talking about, what are some of the things you've learned over your years, and just the importance of always trying to be open to those different perspectives and getting information from all arenas and trying to look at things objectively from different ways of looking at things. I think it's increasingly rare today, but ever more important to do that because it's so easy to get just
I don't want to live in an echo chamber where everybody says the same thing I say. And as we were talking last night, I engage with people. If this person sent out an email to 100 people in the outdoor world, every person would delete that email request. Me, I'll email them back and say, "What's up? Let's have a discussion. Let's have some dialogue." Even though I know I disagree with them on 99% of the issues, I want to hear their perspectives, and I want them to understand the perspectives of the community I come from. Whereas there's risk in that. Sometimes, the people will say, "I can't believe you're talking to that person. Why would you give any feedback to that group?" Or blah, 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 whatever it is. But I'm one of those guys who I want as many perspectives as I possibly can find. And I've still got my values, my principles, my why. My life is driven by my why. Why do I do this? Why am I here? Why am I spending my time on things? That's never going to change. But it doesn't mean that if I listen to somebody who has a different perspective, that I agree with them. It means that I'm trying to learn more. I'm trying to understand. And I think we've gone so far away from that everybody's afraid to engage and interact with those of differing opinions. I'm not. I enjoy it. I can accept it that, hey, the odds are I'm never going to agree with this person on most things. But on that thing, they might have had a point.
Yeah.
I'm also interested how people outside of our community of hunters and anglers view us as hunters and anglers. That's a big part of why I engage with some of these groups is how is the rest of society seeing us? Because we see ourselves through a lens that if you grow up hunting and fishing, you are different. You are never going to see the world the way people do who don't hunt and fish and are connected to those landscapes and hold them to a priority that we do. So accept the fact that we are different. We see the world differently. But we are only 5 to 10% of the world or of our country. So if you want to understand how we're going to have a future when we're that small of a minority, you need to be listening and reaching out to figure out how do the rest of our society see us. At least it's helpful to me, and I try to do that and know that there's going to be risks and I'm going to take some lumps along the way for doing it, but oh well.
Yeah. But to your point, it's just inherently necessary for the future.
Yeah.
If we don't pay attention to that and nurture that and be thoughtful about that perception, we don't have a future.
No, we don't. Shane Mahoney, the Elk Foundation, and you probably saw it on your feeds, he did this piece called Relevance. how do we stay relevant when hunters are 5% of the population? And anyone who hasn't seen that, I'd suggest that they go and read it. It's or listen to it. It's, 4 minutes,
Just
I think.
Video. We actually posted, I embedded it on Wired to Hunt in a blog post.
Oh, did you?
A week and a
Okay.
half or 2
So
weeks
they should
ago,
go out to Wired and Hunt and see that and just think about the fact that, hey, we're 5%. We in our country, 5% does not control the future. You fit within that in some way, shape, or form based on how the other 95% accepts you or views you.
Yeah.
So how do we keep our relevance? Because right now we're very relevant. Our history, our accomplishments, what we do for wildlife and conservation is more than what the other 95% does per capita, and maybe more than what they do collectively.
We got to stay true to that.
Yeah.
We got to communicate that. We need to not step outside of that terrific heritage that we have and start doing some stupid things that knock down all the tremendous achievements of our forefathers and the conservationists and hunters and anglers before us.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of pitfalls there.
Yeah.
We don't need to get into every different.
No.
But man, I mean, there's just, and I probably talk about this too much on the podcast. They're probably sick of me talking about it. But all this stuff it's important. If we want to be able to talk about bear hunts, if we want to be able to talk about strategies for chasing elk, if we want to talk about the best way to hang a trail camera to, pattern a mature whitetail buck, we need to be having these conversations, and we need to be caring about these things.
Yeah, I just think about in my lifetime. I grew up in northern Minnesota. The nearest big community to us was Duluth, Minnesota. St. Louis River dumps into Lake Superior in the Duluth, Superior, Wisconsin area. And when I was growing up, nobody ever thought of fishing where the St. Louis River dumps into Lake Superior. In fact, it was the start of so many invasive non-native species in the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes had become, I think when the Cuyahoga River started on fire in Cleveland in 1967, I was 3 years old. It kind of rose our collective awareness about a lot of things. But even, growing up there and seeing how the Great Lakes were looked at as a little bit of a dumping ground, taken for granted. And what 30 years, 40 years of hard effort, collective sacrifice, prioritizing, cleaning up the Great Lakes. I wonder if people now take for granted that, look at how many tens of millions of people live within close proximity to the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
I wonder how many of them really think back of how bad it could be and how much work it took to get here. Are we going to stand and do what it takes to keep it that way, or are we going to let the hands of time roll back? Are we going to put it in reverse? And to me, the Great Lakes are a great picture for anyone listening to just think about or go and you can do some quick research on it, and you'll see there's no environment, no ecosystem that has been probably as abused as the Great Lakes or has shown such remarkable response and change to smart policy, hard work, and just making it a priority to clean it up.
And one final point on all this, that, we talk about some of the ideas and proposals to roll back some of these things. And lots of times the justification for that is that we need to increase job growth. We need to make it easier for businesses, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's very clear as our community is doing a better job of quantifying the job and economic impact that outdoor recreation and wild productive landscapes have. I think it's very clear that protecting these places, managing these places properly, it is good for jobs. It is good for economic growth. I'm going to get the number wrong, but a new economic report was just released recently from taking a look at the outdoor recreation economy, and maybe you know the number, but $876 billion sounds like what I remember seeing.
Yeah, something like that. It was almost $900 billion.
It is a tremendous, tremendous driver of economic growth, of jobs within across the country, whether it be specifically public lands or recreation,
Fishing,
fishing, hunting,
whatever, yeah.
hiking. I mean, it's a tremendous job grower in rural communities where some of the traditional jobs are starting to change with the way the world's changing. This is a future. This is something that works now. It's going to grow jobs and grow the economy in the future. And, by the way, it also is what allows us to enjoy this way of life.
Yeah, and what's more sustainable than outdoor-related jobs?
Yeah.
It's predicated on good, healthy environments, landscapes that are productive for the things we love, and people make a living doing it. Last I checked, that was as close to the best solution policy experts could get to.
Yeah.
So why are we thinking about doing things that compromise that for the sake of this little job? And every job, if it's your job, it's not this little job. I mean, I get it. I've seen mills close. I've seen mechanization displace loggers. So that when it's your job, it is important. But collectively, we have to look at that and say, all right, how do we make a true assessment about this that doesn't discount all of the outdoor benefits, all the recreation, all the jobs that you just mentioned, and that part of the economy? Because the other sides do a really good job of converting their activity to dollars and cents. We've never been that good at it. We've always relied on it's for this, it's cultural, it's social, and it's all that. But what we're finding is if you want to talk numbers and jobs and economics, our things that we love, we can stand toe-to-toe and have an equally compelling economic argument, as well as all these other things we talk about.
Yeah. And to something you said earlier, caring about these types of things, standing up for these types of things, it's never been convenient, it's never been popular, it's never been easy. And I think it's kind of encouraging, as I've thought about these things and struggled with what should I do, or how do I do this, or how's this going to play, or am I risking the future of whatever I'm doing? And I look back at people like Teddy Roosevelt, or George Bird Grinnell, or Ella Leopold, or Bob Marshall, or all these different people that made a significant impact on whether it be just the future of productive landscapes or public lands or whatever it might be. In every single instance, as I've been studying the history of this, there's been tremendous controversy. There's been tremendous blowback. They're wildly unpopular. There's people calling them all sorts of crazy things. In the short term, you're going to get that. But history is the ultimate judge.
Yep.
And I think, as Roosevelt said, these things need to be preserved for, not just those today, but in the womb of time, for eternity. And I think if you're focused on the long term, if you're focused on the future of these things, if you keep that as a compass that you point towards, and if that's part of your why, then I think it's okay to take your lumps sometimes and maybe step outside of the lines of what your buddies think you should be doing, or your political party, or your community.
I agree 100%, Mark. And the history shows that. So Roosevelt, and he's always the good example one because we study him in history, but he got thrown out of his own party. He had to go start another party. But of all of his critics at the time, how many of them are on the face of Mount Rushmore?
Right.
How many have history judged worthy of being one of the 4 people that represent American ideas to such an extent that they're on Mount Rushmore? None of his critics. You can't even, no one, you would have to Google it to find a name of one of his critics that is of memory.
Yeah.
So he was president, so he had the big pulpit. But point of that is, it wasn't easy for him. He got thrown out. He got ostracized. He was looked at as the wild wingnut, that Western cowboy dude from the Dakotas and Montana who's got these crazy ideas about hunting and fishing and conservation. We need to get rid of him, and they did. But history has judged him as having a much clearer vision than his critics did. So that always gives me comfort, because I go through those days like everybody where it's like, oh man, I don't know, am I out in the weeds? I'm really getting a lot of heat over this. But so did other people.
Yeah. That's the truth.
Just comes with territory. Stand in line, take a number.
There you go. Well, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. So, Randy, both now you've given me another couple hours of your time, and you've given me hours and hours on the mountain. I can't thank you enough. It has been a privilege and an honor to go bear hunting with you, to just have conversations like this with you. Like I said last night when we were driving back from the hunt, you are a tremendous role model for young hunters and anglers and conservationists to look at someone like you who is willing to stand up and speak out on these things. And I respect that tremendously, and I appreciate that. And I'm very glad there's people like you for people like me to learn from.
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate all that. And I appreciate what you are doing. And I told you this last night, there's a cadre of, and you kind of age yourself when you say it in terms of that. There's this cadre of younger thinkers in the conservation and public land, hunting, fishing world that give me such great comfort that, hey, we're going to be on the right path. And you and your listeners and your followers, I don't think that, maybe I'm wrong, but I hope they understand. Maybe that's what I should say. I hope your listeners understand what an impact they're having. Because I have seen just in the last 2 or 3 years, the needle is rising. The pivot point has come, and it's because of people like you, your advocacy, your listeners, your group of people that are making a huge difference. And if I can give a couple hours of my time telling BS stories to that, thanks for having me.
Hey, it works out pretty well all the way around. So, how about next time we talk? We'll be talking about a whitetail trifecta, maybe.
There we go. Let's do it.
All right.
And there you go. Another episode is in the books, and some really important topics to keep in mind there, I think. And I hope you guys found this to be as inspiring and motivating as I have. You guys and gals, the Wired to Hunt community, you and me, let's all keep on grinding together to protect our hunting heritage and our wild lands and our wildlife. Because if we don't do it, who will? All that said, before we go, big thanks to our partners at Sitka Gear, Yeti Coolers, Matthews Archery, Maven Optics, Whitetail Institute of North America, Trophy Ridge, and Huntera Maps. And thank you for listening. I appreciate and value each and every one of you. You guys are an amazing group of outdoorsmen and women, and I hope you enjoy a great spring weekend, and I hope you'll stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.